Hey, welcome back, where I'm building my RANS S21. This is going to be episode, what are we up to? Episode 20. And in this episode, I'm going to install the aileron pulleys, the flap handle. This is a pretty cool device. Also put in the brake master cylinders and the brake hoses. Pretty straightforward installation of things. No big surprises, one or two little gotchas that I document, but it went pretty smooth. On a side note, I just got back from my chapter EAA meeting, and we're going to add 2 more Young Eagle events this year. So we'll do 4 Young Eagle events, which is where we introduce kids to aviation. We take them up for an introductory flight, serve them lunch, and I'm going to video one this spring because it's pretty cool to see what we do and to see the thrill in these kids' face. And I just wonder how many pilots we've created through this one-day adventure by having these kids get introduced to flying. But with that, let's keep building the plane. I'm going to start on the aileron cable installation. And as typical, you get your parts diagram, your parts listing, your text, which is page 116. And your parts are 10C01 and 10C02. And then you just got parts. And again, I found them in miscellaneous boxes. But dig through them. They're all pretty well labeled and pretty easy to sort out. The first pulley assembly I'm going to put together is this forward pulley assembly. And it goes just in front of it's forward of the strut tabs. And there's some parts that you pull out. These are the parts that come out. This little pin is a bear to get in afterwards. But basically, from what it looks like, is they go right in here. There's a little bushing in here that's welded to the cage. And it attaches there. It's a little bit loose, so it's got a little play in it. They say to leave it a little bit loose. And as I said, this pin is a pain in the neck to get in, but I got it in. And then there's one on the other side. And before you close it up, don't forget to run your cable through it, which will attach to your control sticks. The next pulleys I'm putting on are a little bit after these first pulleys. It's a pretty simple install. One bolt goes through. This tang is part of the welded frame. It's not too many parts, and they appear to go right down in here, just a little bit aft of the other pulley. The next thing I did is I connected the aileron cable to the control stick using the castle nut and the cotter pin. The next pulley I'm going to work on is this one that goes a little bit aft of the last 2. It's still on the bottom, and then it's going to angle up to the top. So this bushing, or this cable system is here. Again, it's not too many parts. They get put together with miscellaneous parts and supplies. And it installs back here, just a little bit aft of the other cables you were putting in. The one thing I'm a little stuck on, but I'm sure I'll come to it, the cable that attaches or goes through this pulley is the forward side aileron cable, which is not part of this parts assembly. I looked around in my box because I wanted to put the cable, run it, because I can't close this pulley up until I got the cable inside. I looked around, I couldn't find it, and so rather than distracting myself now and digging through the parts catalogs, I'm going to keep putting the pulleys together, but I can't quite finish assembling this pulley until I have this cable, which I can't find right now and I can't find in the parts. So we'll get to that later, and I'll keep working on these pulleys. The next pulley I'm going to do is this one on the side. It goes about halfway up the cage. Same thing, you've got some parts that you put together. You're not going to be able to finish this one either because you've got to run that same cable that I just mentioned before. And they also mentioned a Teflex cable that comes through this grommet here. So I'm just going to attach them loosely. And they go on to this part of the frame, which, as I said, is about halfway up. They attach on, and the Teflex cable is going to go back there. A couple cotter pins I just stuck in there, but they won't be crimped until after I get the cable through it. The last pulley I'm going to install is the one that goes up top, and it's the most complicated, so I'm glad I waited for last. It actually has 2 pulleys that are going to go on it, and there's lots of nuts and bolts and spacers. There's some bushing that's got to be custom cut that goes up in there, and it installs at the top of the frame. I don't have it completely assembled because I can't put the pins in until I have the cables in there. I did have a little trouble back in here. That last thing you put in is a thick washer, and there just wasn't quite enough space, so I did have to grind down this cage bushing a little bit to get the whole thing to fit in there. But it went in, and it hangs there, and that's the last set of pulleys on this page. I'm installing these 2 pulleys for the rudder system. I hadn't done that when I did these. Again, jumping around a little bit, but trying to get back on track. And these 2 go underneath the seats. Rudder cables come up. Then there's a cotter pin that holds the rudder cable up in place. They're going to feed forward, and they're going to go, I guess, into the lower hole of the pedals for the rudder pedals. You start the flap lever kit with a parts diagram, another list. These parts come from the finishing kit packaging. Get them all sorted out. It's just a collection of same thing. Bolts, nuts, washers, springs, couple brackets. And you get started on the flap lever. You start by cutting a couple bushings to length. You put the end caps in this tube, and then your handle, it's got a little offset to the left. You're going to bolt it to these 2 side plates. You then bolt on the flap handle with a couple washers. There's 2 on one side, 1 on the other side with a shear nut. Then you drop the spring down the tube, and you insert the handle with the hole towards the end. Okay, I got this in, this bolt. 2 little things that occurred. The hole in here where the bolt goes through was not wide enough, and when the bolt went in, the whole thing jammed up. So I had to grind down that hole in the tube just a little bit to get the bolt free. The other thing is this bolt should not be tightened too tight. These bushings act as roller bushings, so they need to be somewhat free to roll up and down these pegs. And if you bolt this bolt too tight, you lose that. They also recommend throwing a little grease on there before you put it together to help with the rolling. But they don't tell you that until after they tell you to attach the bolt. So you got to take it back apart and attach the grease. But just if you remember, put the grease on first. After you finish assembling the flap handle assembly, you get a unit that looks like this. It then attaches onto some bushings that are welded on to the cage in between the seats. I've left everything loose, including these rod ends, because I guess they all need to be adjusted after the flap cables are brought up. So it's installed, but installed loosely. I also may have to take them off because I plan on putting transponder and comm antenna doublers and things in here. So I've left it loose, it's installed in the plane, and it's done, ready for the flap cables. The next step is I'm going to put in the master brake cylinders. They give you 4 of them, 1 for each pedal obviously, and they give you some instructions, and we'll move forward with it. I'm going to get started on the brake cylinders that go behind the rudder pedals. There's a parts diagram for that specific section here. Then there's a figure that shows the layout. This is pilot side, this is passenger side, these are your two wheels. It looks like the orientation of this fitting, it says all fittings are on the forward side. So I'm assuming as I look at this diagram, this cylinder is going to be facing forward, and that these orientations are as if I'm looking through the cylinder, and the fittings are going to go with that orientation. There is a 45-degree fitting here. The rest of them appear to be the 90-degree fittings. So we will get them inserted. And I'm using a thread sealant. It's a high-temperature thread sealant. This is made by Loctite. There's a big difference between thread locker and thread sealant, so make sure you use a thread sealant. And this is the higher temperature one, which is a little better quality. Permatex also makes one that I think would work. Okay, we've got those fittings in. The next step is to attach them to the pedals and the fuselage. It means back in the garage. I came up to the kitchen to do this because the garage was a little cold. This didn't take very long, so back into the garage to get these attached. Okay, I went ahead and attached these cylinders to the pedals. It's just a series of washers and a nut and a bolt. There's a castle nut, a cotter pin. There are a bunch of thin washers and thick washers. You've got to get oriented in there, but that's not that hard. So they just go right on, and you don't want them so tight that they bind up, so they seem to be fine. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put the hoses on these fittings. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect these brake lines to the parking brake and to each other. RANS provides you with a large bag filled with brake lines, and they're just marked with a length. So you come over to the parts page, and each one has a length, and it tells you what it goes to. There's also 4 fittings that have to go into this parking brake. I forgot to put those in. They kind of just go out, so we've got to do those with a sealant. Also on the torque values, there's nothing in the manual about the torque value. I went to 4313, and these lines are difficult to identify exactly what they are in 4313. So I am relying on another builder's research, and he says the torque value is 100 to 140, and he's torquing to 120. Given anything else, I've done a lot of brake lines, and 120 sounds about right, given this material and the fitting strength and everything else. So we're going to torque it to 120 unless I hear differently. Hey, a quick reminder on torque wrenches, in case you'd forgotten. Whenever you're torquing with one of these open-end attachments, I think they're called crow's feet, if I'm not mistaken, attachments. When you put them on your wrench and set your wrench, set your wrench head so that it's at a 90-degree angle. You want to keep the distance from this shaft to here the same. If you set it up here, you're adding about 2 inches length to the handle, and it changes the torque value. There is a formula. If for some reason you need to set it here to get in there and get at it, there is a formula. For mine, this is about 2 inches difference, and it turned out to about 9% less torque on the setting. If you set it here, it'd be more torque. Out here it was 9%. But if you just set it at a 90-degree angle, the distance from the nut down your handle is insignificantly different, and it doesn't measure. It's within the margin of error. But if for some reason you have to set it up here, remember to adjust your torque value. In mine, I've got a 9-inch torque wrench, and it was 9.5% difference in the torque value. So just a reminder. Okay, I've got most of my hoses on. Had one little mishap. My fitting down here, I molded up. As you turn these on and you're trying to get them set in a direction, as you screw once around, twice around, you feel like you might get one more revolution, and I thought I could get one more revolution on it, and I got it too far, and I couldn't unwind it, so I'm going to replace that fitting with a new one. Not a big deal. The rest of these connections go on to the brake level and to the reservoir, which I'm going to start. The reservoir goes back here on the firewall. There's one hole that was pre-drilled, which goes into one part of the bracket. I leveled the hole, marked it, and I'll drill it, and we'll get the reservoir installed. Then there's a T-valve that goes through here someplace. We'll measure that out. And then the brake lever bracket goes back here, and there's instructions for how to measure it out. We'll do that in a minute. After you attach the reservoir, using these 3/16 bolts and washers, there's a hole down here that goes through to a tab on the other side, right back in here. And they have you drill this out to a 7/16. It's a pretty large hole. You're going through stainless steel, and you're also going through that stainless steel tab. So you got to grind your way through it with a 7/16. And then this is that T-bit, which you put in with some Loctite glue, and it comes out on this side. Then you just got to connect your hoses that you haven't connected to there, and then there's a hose that's going to go from the reservoir down to the T. The next step is to install the parking brake. I've got the fittings in, and the parking brake goes, we'll look at the diagram, goes inside the firewall. And you've got a bracket above the parking brake here, and then you got some bolts that come in from the outside, from the forward side of the firewall in. So you come over to the firewall, and they give you this little diagram that basically shows the outline of the brake, and they say start with the two holes that are already pre-drilled, and you're going up 2 1/4 inches, and you're coming across 0.625, which is 5/8 of an inch from that center line hole. So I just measured straight up. There's the 2 1/4, there's the 5/8. So in theory, this is where the left hole is going to go. Then I'll drill the other one, putting the bracket up here. I'll drill the holes through, and then we'll install the bracket on the other side, and the bolts will come in from this side. I'm going to insert this video back a little bit, even though it's already up here. When you put these fittings in, this top right fitting, this is on the inside of your firewall, you've got to angle out a little bit, if you can see the angle, because you've got to clear this frame pipe. If you just have it come straight out, you can't fit your hose fitting on. So I had to reset this. I had to take it out, clean it up, and reset it. So in trying to prevent someone else from having to reset another fitting, this one, and they all could get angled out just a little bit, and they'd accept the hoses a little bit better. These are okay. I'm not going to reset them all. I can get my hose in there. But on this one, to clear the pipe, you definitely got to angle it. I have run the brake line up the landing strut, or the landing gear, and I started the run from the bottom because I noticed one builder at one point ran it from the top and somehow ended up with a big loop here. So I started with the bottom, ran it up. I don't know if I'm supposed to remove this bolt and put it on the inside. So the answer is yes. You do need to take that bolt out in order to run the brake line into the cavity that they've carved out of the landing gear. So I jacked the plane up and took the pressure off the leg, got the bolt out from this side, and we'll put the bolt back in and do the other side. I am under the plane looking up, and this is the brake line coming up from the wheel. To put the through skin adapter and fitting, they tell you to measure 1 inch out from this line and 4 inches back from the skin over here. That puts it about here. I saw some other builders struggle with the cables that were too long and they looped in places. But if I put it over here, I'm not sure how I would get this fitting on here. So what I did is I attached the fitting, put it into the cavity, measured it where it would fit without creasing this or bending it, and then marked it at the base here. Now this fitting will go through the hull, through the skin, but that's the location to where this would just fit nicely onto that hose fitting. So I'm gonna drill it here rather than over here, because I'm just not sure how it would screw on otherwise. Again, this is me just taking some common sense thinking about how I want that fitting to go in and kind of deviating from the instructions a little bit, which I'll let you know if it doesn't work. Okay, this is me looking up again. I've drilled this fitting through the skin and attached it, and as you can see, I've just got a nice loop here so that it's not creased or exaggerated, and it seemed to work fine the way I measured it. Your mileage may vary, do it the way you want, but that's the way I did it. It seemed to work. Okay, in attaching these brake lines, you look at the diagram, you've got one coming from the parking brake down to the right wheel, and then from the parking brake down to the left wheel. This is clearly the shorter extension, this is the longer one. You come over here to the parts page, and they say braided line 43-inch goes from the parking valve to the right bulkhead. The 63-inch goes from the parking valve to the left bulkhead. The 63-inch is 20 inches longer. The left side should not be 20 inches longer. I'm assuming they've got this backwards. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to correct this manual anymore. So if I see something that doesn't make sense, I'm just going to apply it the way it makes sense. So I'm pretty sure this 63-inch is supposed to go to the right-hand bulkhead, which is over here, and we need the longer run to get there. So that's the way I'm going to run it. Well, that's a pretty good place to end. No gotchas there, went pretty straightforward. That section took me 24.7 hours. That brings my build time to 725.1 hours, project to date. The next section, I think we're going to put some antennas on, maybe get started on the header tank, battery box. That's kind of where I am up to now, so that'll probably take another video. But thanks for watching. I'm enjoying the build. Hope you're enjoying the videos. Dream it, just build it.